There may be some concretes in the building, but if it makes you feel any better, they didn't have any cups the last time we checked. So you might as well be here enjoying me. Okay, so we are called to order, and our first item of business is to approve the minutes from January 29th, February 3rd, and February 4th. Is there a, Michelle? Microphone, please.
And if there are any giant spaces or things that are repeated twice, Kayla's hates me, so I will fix all those things after you approve.
Thank you. Do we have any other corrections, additions? Seeing none, a motion to approve is in order. Representative Hubert, and do I have a second from Representative Wolf? We've discussed it, so I'll call the question. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. And the ayes have it. Those minutes are approved. I'm going to give you a couple of updates on the calendar. I am adding a presentation on KISA 2.0. Dr. Watson talked about it a little bit on the day that he was with us, but we're going to go into it a little bit deeper on May 3rd. And the reason that this is actually very important is there's a... When? March 3rd. Yeah, March 3rd. Okay. Oh, May 3rd. Yeah, you're not going to be here.
Something we don't know?
I can be a little dyslexic at times. Anyway, there is a possibility of an accreditation bill coming to us, and it's something that I want to make sure that we've all had time to develop a good background and understanding on that process. And for Thursday, that same Thursday, March 6th, we are going to have the Kansas Master Teachers come, and Representative Schreiber is going to be their MC. So we're looking forward to seeing some outstanding Kansas teachers. And today, I told you guys I was trying to work on an informational briefing for today, and we are adding just a, Dr. Harwood is going to touch on TASN for us because that came up. And I know I have a lot of new people on this committee, and I want to keep developing a core understanding of terms that we'll probably talk about several times in the future. With that said, we will begin to now move forward to discussion. Actually, before I do, I would like to acknowledge Dr. Elaine Frisbee. She brought answers to your questions for you on and this did get uploaded to KLIS. Dr. Frisbee, I didn't get a chance to see if you emailed me back, if you wanted to explain what you brought the committee. And I thought this would be helpful background. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not Dr. Frisbee, be here. Uh-oh. Oh, goodness. Happy to be here this afternoon. I believe in front of you, your committee assistant has provided you a printout of the information that I was able to send over this morning with just a little bit more background and some examples of what we have with our service scholarships. So just as a refresher, Senate Bill 50 we talked a little bit about earlier this week, and the goal of that bill was to unify our procedures in the statutes that touch on all of these service programs to make them similar in terms of the interest rate that is applied when someone goes into repayment and the point in time at which the interest rate starts to calculate, along with a technical adjustment to the adult learner grant program. So again, there are 434 individuals in repayment status with us. Of those, 227 are in collections. And so we just give you some amounts there for each of the programs. So if you average out some of these amounts, you're not going to see extraordinarily high balances for any one individual. But on an individual basis, I wanted to just note near the top of the second page, I just pulled out a few examples, one more recent, two going back farther. We have a student who was in the Teacher Service Scholarship Program who originally received $5,000, and they now owe nearly $13,000 because of accrued interest over the years. We have a nursing service scholarship recipient, again, also an original award of $5,000, now owes over $17,000 with accrued interest. And we do have a more recent student. Because the timing is more recent in time, the interest has not grown so much. They are making payments on an $11,896 award, and their current payoff is $14,569. So just some broader information there on some current rates. Much of what you see at the bottom of page 2 is replicating information on the educationdata.org website, which summarizes a lot of current rates. When you receive a student loan, you might get a different rate depending on your status. If you're a graduate student or you're getting that federal parent loan through the PLUS program, it's going to be a slightly different rate than if you're an undergraduate student. And so just giving you some information. Of course, there are some private loan options. Those rates can be varied quite widely. And for a lot of students, they won't qualify for those, however. So just give you a bit of a rundown there, some data on historical numbers there on page 3. Both for the undergraduate subsidized and unsubsidized, those are the federal loans. For going back, right now it's 653. Going back, it's been as low as 376 or 275, depending on the year. The federal PLUS loan there is noted to the right, and you'll see there fiscal year 2025, the most current rate. That is the rate that many of our programs are pegged to, plus 5 percentage points, and that's the 9.08%. Lastly, the last bit of information just gives, I found the communication from our former director of financial aid. At the time when we started talking about this about a year and a half ago, she polled other similar state administrators of financial aid programs to see how do other states approach the interest rates. And so the first 2 states, West Virginia and Maine, have programs similar, and they are going, and this is also what helped guide us to the 5% rate. There used to be a federal Perkins loan program, and it was sort of a revolving loan program where students could get a loan and it would be paid back, and then the money that was paid back would be plowed into new loans for students. And that has been a 5% interest rate for quite a while. That program has been suspended and is no longer active. Vermont and New York reported that they have either all or most of their programs at 0%. And Minnesota actually has a very different approach. They do revenue bonds, and they issue revenue bonds, and they don't receive state appropriations for their programs, and that's how they finance their funding for their scholarships. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to try to answer questions if I can. Again, I have my Director of Financial Aid here, Michelle Ariano, here to help me with technical questions.
Thank you very much. And I meant to call you Vice President Frisbee.
Thank you.
And so I'll get the title right. I apologize for that. My ranking minority member has some questions for you, and I think we have the same questions. I'll turn it over to you, Representative Stogsdill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, on page 2, it says some individual examples are noted below. A Kansas Teacher Service Scholarship recipient who was placed in repayment status as of February 2009 has interest accruing back to September 2007, which is 17 months. The original award was $5,000 with a current payoff of $12,770. How does that?
Madam Chair, so the interest keeps accruing all since then. So now we're in 2025.
Oh, okay. So you're
it
talking.
keeps building.
Okay, but they could, well, okay.
I'll ask it for you. So did they get really behind on their payments? And can you remind me how many years somebody has to pay this back?
When someone goes into repayment, they have 5 years to repay their scholarship. So the amount of the award is divided by 60, and each month you make payments for over 5 years. We do have instances where students fall behind, and depending on the length of time they fall behind, then we may end up with them in collections. And so then that we get into a different path with those students. And so interest, it's like any other loan, if you fall behind, there's going to be some financial repercussions for it.
So then this is an example of somebody who's very, very far behind.
It could very well be. I don't know the circumstances of each individual of these 3, but I suspect that is the case, yes.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions? Representative Featherston?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know on Tuesday you said you had thousands of students get these scholarships. Do you have any firmer number, like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000?
Madam Chair, I'm afraid yesterday I fell down a budget rabbit hole that I wasn't able to climb out enough to get those numbers, but we would have data. We just have to draw a line to say how many awards have we made since time X, and we can do that. Let me make another note, and I can get that for you.
Thank you, we appreciate that. Representative Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Vice President. If my math is correct, 434 individuals are in repayment, and of those, 227 are in collections. That's more than half. Do you try and collect, and how long do you collect?
Madam Chair, we do have procedures, and some of that is guided, I believe, by state law in terms of how we must proceed. And we do also have a whole other procedure for folks who end their debt will go to state set-off. And so if you are owing the state a debt like this, and you are due a state income tax refund, perhaps you file your taxes, and over here in the Department of Revenue, you are owed some amount. That amount can be withheld by the Department of Administration to go apply toward that debt. So there are multiple avenues toward recovering this.
And is this reported just like a bank would, so it impacts their credit scores?
Yes, I believe so.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. I know it's a busy time for you guys, and you guys made an effort to bring us back answers, and you're one of the best agencies to have done that, so that is truly appreciated. So now I will open discussion and action on Senate Bill 50, and I'll just kind of open it up with what kind of comments do you guys have, and if anybody has an amendment, this is a good time to make it. Representative Pishney.
Madam Chair, I do have an amendment with regard to the rate, and we'll let Jason hand that out, please.
And Representative, go ahead and explain why that is handed out, please.
The reason, when I looked at this chart the other day that we received in the presentation, I was concerned by a couple of things. Number one, that the 5% would be fixed, and that then in a couple of years or 3 years or sometime in the future, we'd be back in amending the rate either down or up because the rates in the private sector have gone up or down that much, or in the public sector too. And then secondly, I was concerned about the 5% being added on to the 9.08. So I asked Jason Long to do an amendment for me. And Jason, would you explain what you did, please?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, the amendment would just be on page 1 of the bill in new section 1, which establishes the uniform interest rate applicable to all of these repayment obligations, and would replace the 5% per year fixed rate with an amount equivalent to the interest rate applicable to loans made under the Federal Plus program. So that's that Federal Plus rate that Ms. Frisbee was alluding to. And that would be the rate at the time that the individual enters into an agreement that includes a repayment obligation. So at the time they enter into the agreement to receive the financial aid under these programs would be the date that then they would look at the rate under the Federal Plus program, and that would be the applicable interest rate for any repayment obligation of the student.
So, Madam Chair, to piggyback onto that with regard to explanation, I'm only amending with this document the interest rate, as Jason has already explained. So at this point, it would be somewhere around that 9% rate rather than a 14% rate with that additional 5% added on. But I did not, in this amendment, change when that would take effect, and as Jason's stated, it would be when the agreement is entered into, and that's in paragraph 1, section 1, paragraph 1. That's still in there. I just changed the rate. And then lastly, and maybe if a conferee needs to correct me, my understanding, but it's my understanding that when the interest comes in on these, that it goes into the fund so that there's more monies available to help with the program. And that was another reason I didn't think 5% was adequate enough, but the middle of that from 5 to 14% made more sense.
Thank you. Do we have questions for the maker of our amendment? Okay, I'll let you ask Jason, and then oh, I'm sorry. So second by Representative Hubert. Thank you. Representative McNorton?
And this might be for Jason or Ms. Frisbee, but the way I understand the federal plus is that is a locked-in rate when you start the agreement. It's not a fluctuating rate as the scholarship time or that time goes on. It's a locked-in rate at that time, the way I understand it.
Jason?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee, the way the amendment is written, it would be the rate at the time the individual enters into the agreement to receive financial aid, and it would be fixed at that point for that particular individual.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Do we have other questions? Representative Featherston?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just pulled up the fiscal note to the original bill due to this discussion of where is this interest going, and it says, the Board of Regents indicates enactment of the bill would have a negligible fiscal effect on agency operations. So I'm not sure that this money is going into some fund.
My understanding would be the money goes in, but in terms of what it costs them to administer it, that's where the negligible effect is. But I feel much better letting the expert in the room answer that. So, Vice President Frisbee?
Thank you for that opportunity, Madam Chair. That is correct. It will be easier for our staff to track those, if everybody is getting their interest accruing at that same moment in time. This is the time and that is the rate at that time, and then we don't have to manage fluctuating plus rates and then adding 5 percentage points. So this would be an improvement over our current status for sure.
Thank you very much. Representative Featherston, did we get your question answered, or did you have a follow-up? Okay. It eventually goes to, it will come out of the House committee, that'll go to the House, it goes under the line, hopefully it goes above the line. If it passes, then it will at some point go to conference committee. All right. Any other questions? Representative Wolf, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just for clarification, so the state would no longer have any say in the interest rate if we did this? It'd just be whatever the federal was? We would never have to go in and adjust it? It'd just stay at whatever federal is taking care of for us, correct?
Unless we chose to do so.
Okay.
But that would be a predictable standard going on. Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and call the question. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. And the ayes appear to have it. Do we have any further discussion or about Senate Bill 50? Do we have any other amendments? Representative McNorton?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment I'd like to bring, and Jason has it ready here to pass out. Why he's doing that, I'll explain it real quick. On page 1 there, it'll make the interest start accruing from the date that the student receives the money, instead of from the date that they default on the loan. And I'll let Jason explain a little bit further, but that is the meat of the amendment.
Before we do that, do we have a second? I missed who that was. Representative Pishney seconds. And Jason, you may explain.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee, the amendment also is just on page 1 of the bill, and the provision starting line 25 that establishes the accrual date for when the interest begins to accrue on a repayment obligation, and it would specify that the accrual date would begin on the date that monies were dispersed on behalf of the individual pursuant to an agreement for the scholarship grant or other financial aid. So on the date so if a student does go into a repayment obligation, they would look back to the date when monies were dispersed on behalf of that individual for financial aid, and that would be the date that they would begin calculating the interest rate on the monies that were due to be repaid.
Representative Stogsdill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So are you saying that if a student takes out or gets a grant and they pay it faithfully for 3 years, and then for some reason or other they have to default on that and they go into repayment, it would go all the way back 3 years to what the original date was?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, yes, it would go back to the date when the monies were first dispersed on behalf of the individual when they were taking those college classes. Some of the programs currently have an accrual date that is based on that calculation. Others have various other accrual dates. This would establish that as the uniform accrual date for these scholarship programs.
Thank you.
Representative Wolf and then McNorton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. But Jason, if they're already in repayment, didn't it already start at that first date to begin with?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, the student would receive monies to go to school, and they go to school and they go into their service obligation, and if they fail to meet their service obligation and go into a repayment obligation to repay the financial aid they received, the interest rate would be calculated back to the date when they first received a disbursement of those monies to go to school.
Representative McNorton?
Yeah, the way I look at this and why I brought this amendment is if we went to a bank to get a loan to go to school and you didn't pay it back, the bank's going to charge you interest from the day you walked out with that check in your pocket. So I think this is the way we need to look at this. Hopefully, we don't have to go back. It's here to help the students, but if they don't decide not to pay this back or follow through with the agreement that they signed, then I believe we ought to go back to the date that they started the money. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, but to previous rep, if somebody had a $5,000 scholarship and they paid $3,000 off and then for some reason couldn't pay it, that interest would accrue on the $2,000 that they owed. It wouldn't be the full $5,000 amount that they originally started with. And you might confirm that that would be true.
Jason, please give us some clarity.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, so in the hypothetical of a student receiving $5,000 in financial aid, that money would not be due and to be repaid as long as the student completed their service obligation under the program. If the student failed to complete their service obligation and the full $5,000 became due as a repayment obligation under the terms of their agreement, the interest rate would be calculated back to the date when they first received a disbursement of those funds and would apply to the full $5,000.
Representative McNorton and then Featherston.
To follow up on that, Jason, if they had paid half of it off before they defaulted on the agreement.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, these are not student loans. These are financial aid that is provided without any repayment obligation, provided the student completes their service requirement. And so there is no repayment of the obligation until they fail to meet their service obligation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason, for the clarity. Representative Featherston?
I guess I just want to add, I'm really uncomfortable if somebody has tried to give their service and something has happened, which I would discuss later, that then we're going to tag them clear back to day one on $1. I mean, you're looking at 4 years of interest that accrued probably during school, another 3 in this situation. You're looking at 7 years of compounding interest. to somebody who maybe has had some kind of family disaster that has caused them to leave the profession that they're repaying, I think that puts the state in the position of forcing our young people into bankruptcy. And I'm not comfortable with that.
Thank you. Vice President Frisbee, does any of the programs allow for, I know that Emerge and the National Guard Scholarship allow kind of an out for extenuating circumstances. Do any of these programs do that?
So, Madam Chair, I believe every one of them we do have an option to deactivate someone and give someone relief from, if there are circumstances that are dire, that just unavoidable. What our goal here was of having to avoid making those determinations, but just to say, here's the line in the sand. This is when you fell out of your service, and that's the point in time that interest was applied, so. But we do have that flexibility.
Thank you. Do you have any idea how many times you guys have done that?
That might take some research, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. Any other, Representative Wolf and then Stogsdill?
Yes, so my question is, say they have 4 years of service and they go up to their 3 years, then they only owe the 25% that's left? Or do they owe the whole amount because they did not complete the whole amount?
It's somewhat of a binary, as Revisor Long explained. You are in service or you're out of service, and that's when it all hits at once. Yes.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. Representative Stogsdill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what you're saying is if you go back to the origination of that grant, it would be the interest rate that was charged might be lower than what it is today, or it could be higher.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, based on the previously adopted amendment, the interest rate would be the rate at the time the agreement was entered into by the individual.
Okay, so it could be lower, couldn't it?
The interest rate could be lower than the going rate at the time the obligation comes into effect, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, all those in favor, please say aye. Opposed? No. The chair is in doubt. If you are voting yes, please raise one of your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. I see 4 yes, and if let's start over. If you are voting yes for the amendment, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and if you are voting no, please raise your hand. And 12 are voting no. The amendment fails. Do we have further discussion or amendments? Representative Steele.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank the the representative who did bring the amendment for following the Federal Plus. I think this holds students accountable when they sign an agreement. I think that this is a good compromise to what the bringers of the bill wanted, and I stand in favor of that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Other discussion? Representative Hubert.
I'll go ahead and make the motion if we can have further discussions necessary, but I move that we pass House Senate Bill 50 as amended.
Second from Representative Pishney. Any further discussion? Representative Featherston.
Thank you. As I said on Tuesday, my husband went to school on one of these rural health scholarships. Before he entered into that agreement, he certainly saw offers from plenty of small towns throughout Kansas or even throughout the country that would have paid for his medical school. you don't just willy-nilly say, well, this is the best rate, da-da-da. It gave us some flexibility to return home for him without just causing too many problems and thoughts. I think we're far too focused here on punishment and let's get even, and I'm really not comfortable with that spirit. I appreciate that this amendment, at least the previous amendment, is better than some things, but any changes to this bill are going to send it back to the Senate where it passed 39-1. I wouldn't count on any of this surviving in conference committee. I think we need to be a little more charitable in how we're thinking about these students, that something has happened. Maybe they decided 3 years into teaching that it's not their thing, and I think I would rather have a teacher leave if it's really not for them than to like stick it out another year and not do their best work.
Any other discussion? Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in response to my former representative, the amendment I brought was not out of punishment or anything else. I just think if somebody is committed to something, hopefully they can fulfill it. That's why we have the scholarships, to help students who need help and not to punish them. So I just wanted to make sure that we were clear. Thank you.
Representative Featherston.
I didn't mean to single you out. That was not my intention. I apologize for that.
I thank you both for a spirit of good conversation. Any further discussion? Seeing none, the chair calls the question. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? And the motion passes. So that was the hard part of our day. Thank you, guys. I think it was a very interesting discussion, and a lot of very good points of you were shared, and I appreciate the openness and the quality of the conversation. And we turn it over to Dr. Harwood, and Dr. Harwood, you're kind of like tied for our earliest ending time. But that's okay. We set that record yesterday. Interestingly, you were not with us, but I want to really just say that there's a lot of times we as a committee have had questions, and I have felt that it would be beneficial to the committee to get a stronger background. We have a lot of freshmen this year on this committee, and the Department of Education has been very gracious to respond very rapidly with information that I think will help us do our jobs better. So concrete jokes aside, we really do appreciate you coming and taking the time to teach us about TASN. So please take it away.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm happy to be here and share information, but understand that if I'm standing between anyone and ice cream, maybe I can be brief. The information that we sent actually has a lot of information. I'm not going to cover all of it. There's plenty there to read. It also shows a link to the TASN website where there is more information. But in general, TASN is an umbrella term, which then actually has several different things underneath it. So TASN stands for the Technical Assistance System and Network. All of the programs in TASN are required by federal regulation or law that the state provide as part of our federal funding. So all of them are funded by federal grants, typically either IDEA, which is special ed, or ESEA, which is the Elementary and Secondary Schools Act, or that's ESSA. It's now as ESEA. So KSDE has done this through granting contracts for organizations to complete the work versus employing people at the state level to do that. So the first page has a little bit of a descriptor The second page talks about the largest of the contracts. So over a 5-year period, the contracts that are for TASN are about $43 million. So about $8 million, or a little about $8.5 million a year. The largest of those contracts, about $19 or almost $5 million a year, or almost $4 million a year, is for MTSS, which is the multi-tier system of supports. And so this is actually through IDEA, and multi-tier system of supports is a program, or actually not really a program, it's a system, and it's in the name, where school districts, before somebody can be identified as special education, the school district has to try as many different things as possible to make sure that the student doesn't need to be labeled as special education. And MTSS is part of that, is a process to help do that. And so that's where the biggest money goes to, and it's to help districts set up systems. And MTSS really talks about 3 tiers of support. Tier 1 is classroom education. And so that's just when you go into the classroom, that's tier 1. There are supports that happen with that. Tier 2 is could be some pull out or push in things that happen. It could be like a reading aid or a reading specialist. Tier 3 are more intensive supports that typically are always kind of pull out supports, and that would be getting towards the need for special education. So that's what MTSS does. And so what this grant does is help support school districts in either establishing a process or strengthening the process that they have. So that's the largest one. The next 2 pages talk about several other ones. So one of them is Educate Kansas, which is for teacher recruitment and retention. So there used to be a website called kansasteachingjobs.com that's changed to Educate Kansas. Any school district in the state can list an education opening on that. They also help districts in creating promotional materials so that they can help recruit people. The next one down is also a retention program. Another one of the larger one is the Kansas Learning Network. As opposed to being through IDEA, this is actually through ESEA. And this is actually for schools that are targeted for improvement. And this would be specialized support for schools, not necessarily districts, that are targeted for improvement because of student performance. You'll notice that there are a number of other ones in there. There's one to support teachers to become teachers for students that are deaf. There's one for to support teachers that are becoming helping visually impaired. That gets a little confusing because there's another one that is for supplies and support for visually impaired education. So one is about getting teachers licensed to do it. The other one is providing support, which could be Braille or any other thing for visually impaired. Some of these are funded through service centers, which is where this started. The way that works is that the service center is the fiscal agent for the contract, and then they would employ people to do things. So the MTSS contract, which is the largest one, is through Keystone. They have a couple of other ones. Educate Kansas is through Greenbush, and then KLN is through Southwest Plains. The services are still statewide, but that service center is the one that has the contract to do that. Some of the other ones, like the Kansas, for the teachers of the deaf and teachers of the blind, those contracts are actually with the School for the Deaf and the School for the Blind. So there's another one that's called Infinitech, which is actually this assistive technology for students with special needs that actually goes through a cerebral palsy foundation that was originated in at the University of Chicago. And so the way this works is that KSDE does an RFP for these contracts. They've typically been 5-year contracts. When you'll see that, actually, you probably don't see it in this one, but in another document that you'll be getting about service centers, these contracts are all up June 30th of 2025. So we are currently in the RFP process. So they would be renewed. One of the things that KSD has decided to do is look at the terms of some of the contracts and going with 2-year contracts with annual renewals up to 5 years. After that, mostly that is that as we see things that are happening with KISA 2.0, which you'll hear more about on Monday, and some other things, we need to be able to be more flexible in how that happens. So if the contract is not getting what we need, we would not be stuck into a 5-year contract. If it's doing what we need it to do, then we could continue to renew it. So that's just one of the ways we are looking at some of these things that, as we move forward. So with that, I'd be happy to answer questions. Like I said, there's a lot more information in the handout than I went over.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate that. Do we have questions for Dr. Harwood? Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Dr. Harwood. So the contracts they have with the service centers, you mentioned Greenbush and a couple others. Why are we going with an outside company instead of you guys? I mean, is there a cost, is there a cost savings one side or the other is my question.
So, so cost savings, no, because the federal funding is what the federal funding is. So we would still be spending the same amount of money. One thing that we are evaluating now is, would there be a difference in service to districts if we did it ourselves versus doing that? We started having those conversations this year and decided we were not in a position to fix that all at once, which is another reason why we'd be looking at a shorter term contract to give us more time to figure out, are we getting the best return on this investment for it? But as far as savings, there wouldn't be any, but could there be increased service with what we'd be looking at?
Any other questions for Dr. Harwood?
I will say one thing that would happen is if we took all these contracts back, for those of you who are on K-12 budget, we would get into the FTE discussion very quickly because we would probably get about 30% bigger as an agency if we employed all of these people instead of having it. So having it with the contracts does give us more flexibility that they don't necessarily hire full-time people. They can then contract with people for services and move things around. So that's what we'll look at is does this give us better flexibility to provide better service or not?
So that begs a question in my mind. So the employees hired through the contract are working for someone else. I'm assuming that means that they're not on capers.
They would not be. So a service center employee is actually a non-USD capers person. So when you look at, again, for those of you on K-12 budget, there's USD capers and then non-USD capers. Because service centers are actually governmental agencies, their employees would be. But if it's somebody that they hire to do this PD or that PD, and it's just basically it'd be a 1099 kind of situation, they would not be eligible for any benefits, including capers.
So along with the FTE conversation would be the capers impact to the budget. Okay. Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for presenting this information today. I just had a question on, and we'd asked the other day for all of the, I think there are 13 projects and the interlocals that are assigned to each one. So they sign on, do they don't receive the benefits from that interlocal, like capers and such?
So I wasn't here.
Like-
I need.
Like MTSS, if it signs on with an interlocal Keystone, as it said, they don't receive the benefits?
So if it's going to be depending on how, if they are employed as a interlocal or a service center employee, they would. If they are not employed as a service center, which the contract could allow for them to do that, then they would not be eligible for capers benefits.
Can I ask one more? Can you give me an example of an employee that wouldn't be?
So it would have to be in how that employee was structured. So I'm having a hard time understanding how they wouldn't be. If they are an interlocal employee, they would be. I don't have an example of how they would do that otherwise, but there could be a mechanism for it. I just don't know what that would be.
So like if you're employed with MTSS, you could possibly be on capers?
If you are an interlocal employee, yes.
So if they're a TASN employee, they're not an interlocal?
I'd have to look and see how TASN is actually, how they're actually employing their staff. Since they're not ours, we just didn't look into how that happens. We look at the contract with the person we have the contract and the results we're getting. They have some flexibility in how they do the staffing portion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on the RFPs, when they file the grant, does the interlocal apply for the grant, or with the TASN project?
So the RFPs go out by project, and so anybody can respond to the RFP, and then each interlocal could be given a different project, but they could be given more than one. So I mean, like Keystone has several of them, whereas Greenbush and Southwest Plains only have one. So it would just depend on the evaluation of the RFP that comes back. And just for your information, the way that works through the state procurement is if there's more than one RFP that comes back, the department gets all of the information blind. We don't know who the actual provider is, and we don't know what costs they are, what they say the costs are. The evaluation first comes on, can they fulfill the contract? And then for the ones that can, those go back to procurement, and then they come back to us with the associated costs, and then we evaluate the proposals that we said, yeah, these can do the work, and then we evaluate them on cost on the second part. So we wouldn't know on the first round, as long as there's more than one proposal, who the proposals were from. If there's only one, then we get all the information because there's only one.
Last one.
Yes, you may. I'm learning a lot.
I promise. So I'm looking at the MTSS, and you said that's the 3 tiers of supports.
Multi-tier systems of support, yeah.
And I see on the second bracket, the Kansas Math Project. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So, only a little bit. So the Kansas, so that would be specific to, typically in MTSS, a district would be looking at several areas. So typically it's English language arts, mathematics, and then behavior are some of the ones where you set up the tiers of support. So the math project would be helping districts look at their math process and could be looking at their tier 1 program or how they're doing that, or tier 2 or tier 3. And so it would be supporting the district in either establishing tiers of support for math or improving or sustaining those.
Representative Brantley, could you point me to where you were looking? Which page number?
This is on the back side of the first page. Underneath the Kansas map in the first paragraph, it says the project in collaboration with KSTE launched the Kansas Math Project.
Okay, I'm with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions for Dr. Harwood? Representative Steele.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are there any levels that benchmarks or anything that TASN would be getting? We continue to have decreased reading rates, decreased math scores, like our NAEP scores are lower. So what is TASN's benchmarks for success?
So, so actually part of the federal contracts is we actually have to have a separate federal contract that does evaluation. And so any of the providers turn in information to the evaluating agency. They would only be looking at the schools or districts that they are actually working with. So they wouldn't be looking at statewide data. They'd be looking at how has what we have done now made an impact. And so then those evaluations are then turned in. So they would have to provide data on what's happened and would get, that would be part of the evaluation.
Yes, you may.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, what is that?
So,
I'm curious because our scores continue to drop. Our students aren't being successful. So if TASN is tasked with assisting teachers to help and we're not getting results, what is the evaluation? Is there specific questions?
So yes, it would depend on the project. So again, TASN is a big thing. So so MTSS or KLN or any of those would have metrics that they are reporting towards evaluation toward their effectiveness.
Is it possible to send those metrics to the committee?
I'll have to look at what the evaluations are, but yeah, I mean, if the evaluations we get back would be public documents. So.
Thank you. Receiving those metrics would be good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
That'd be fine, and thank you for offering to send those. Any other questions for Dr. Harwood? Okay. You have another one? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for bringing this information. Does TASN have a director that oversees the projects?
So one of the assistant directors in KSDE would be the person that kind of works on the TASN contracts. Again, TASN is not necessarily one thing. It's 13 different projects. Each of those projects would have a director, point of contract. Some of them are not very big, so it's going to depend on the size of it. But yes, so each project does these, whoever has the contract would designate that person. And then there are people at KSDE that oversee the TASN, each of the TASN contracts.
So there's not one person that really oversees it? Is Michelle still there?
So I've only been there for a year, and there's more than one Michelle. So
Is Michelle Hayes still the director of TASN?
So yeah, but she's not a KSD employee. She works. So she works in one of the contracts. Carrie Haig is the assistant director in special education and title services that coordinates the title things for us. So yes. So Michelle Hayes still works. I don't remember. I think she's an MTSS. I can't remember which one she's working through, but yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Do any more questions? Go ahead and say what you would like to say.
The only thing I was going to say is that I think also on Tuesday there's a question about service center contracts. We're getting that information together, so we'll send that out with which will actually break down each of the TASN contracts that are with service centers. The only thing I would say is that of all 13 of them, not all of them were service centers, so you won't see all of the TASN projects with the service center contracts because some of them are with other agencies, but then you'll also see the other contracts that are mostly through ESSER funds.
Okay. Representative McNorton.
Thank you.
Dr. Harwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is federally grant money,
All federal grant money.
and is that grant money sustainable?
So all of these would actually, so ESEA and Title I are both formula grants through the federal government. So we get this question a lot with some of the talk about federal funding, all those kinds of things. So what we've talked to districts about is that these are all forward funded. So the funding has been appropriated by Congress through September 30th of 2025. It would actually, it should take congressional action to make any changes to any of that. So as much as we can say, then yes, it is.
Thank you.
There is no such thing as an ongoing budget, is the answer to that question. Any more questions for Dr. Harwood?
The other thing I would say to Representative McNorton, we are still able to draw down the funds to make the payments from all of the federal formula grants. And again, the difference with the formula grants, that means there is a federal law that says, here's the amount of money, and this is how you will distribute it to states. So that's the difference between a formula grant and a discretionary grant, which might say to the the U.S. Department of Education, here's a set amount of money, and you should do these kinds of things with it. Or it actually is discretionary for the administration, where each administration kind of decides how some of what projects happen with that. We've told districts in that case that, just like with any administration, you should not count on the discretionary grants continuing indefinitely. And that's true for any discretionary grant.
Thank you. Any more questions for Dr. Harwood? I will ask the last question then.
Okay.
What's your favorite flavor of concrete?
I'd probably go with cookie dough if they have it, so we'll see where it's at.
That's a good choice. Thank you all for great discussions today, and we will see you on Monday. We are adjourned.